Hello everyone, and welcome to this month's webinar. So this month I'm going to be talking about the Digital Experience Hub, and this is just an introductory webinar and tutorial. This will not be going into a deep dive into building DXH connectors. It actually will just be an introduction to getting the DXH configured and starting to use it programmatically. So we will be covering some of the more advanced developer topics in later months. But for now, this is just a getting started tutorial. Okay, so let's begin. I'd like to start with helping to define what the Digital Experience Hub is. And for that, there are a couple of analogies that I've seen. The second one is actually my favorite, but the initial analogy that I heard about it was sort of a hub and spoke architecture. In which you define a landscape for your environment, which consists of multiple systems, Ektron just simply being one of those systems out of many. The other systems may include Salesforce, may include Marketo for marketing automation, SharePoint, or even a custom internal system. And we definitely do have clients working with custom internal systems that want a deep integration with Ektron. And the Digital Experience Hub can provide an architecture that supports that really well. The more lay analogy that I like to use is a polyglot analogy. So if you ever watch a video of the UN, then you'll see people in the crowd there who are providing translations. So polyglot is somebody who speaks multiple languages. And so this person makes sure that even though there may be language barriers between the diplomats at the UN, the communication can continue. They can provide on-the-spot translation between any two parties. And that's kind of how I look at the Digital Experience Hubs. It's not really a system that stores and processes all of this data so much as a system that helps translate between other applications. So the way that you can describe this is that Ektron doesn't speak SharePoint and SharePoint doesn't speak Ektron, but the Digital Experience Hub still allows them to communicate effectively and share data. And so the first step is to define your digital landscape. Web content management is just one spoke in that metaphorical wheel. The other systems, as I said, could be SharePoint, marketing systems, or even internal data stores. So all of these separate applications define your digital landscape, are part of your content strategy, and they all have something to contribute to your web presence. And any system that has available APIs are DXH capable. So this could be a system that has RESTful APIs. Certainly a system like Salesforce is not built on another Ektron WCM platform or anything similar to it that I'm aware, but has available RESTful APIs that we're able to implement into a connector and allow that connector to communicate between the context bus, which is the center of the wheel, and the other systems on each of those spokes. So which systems do you want to connect? The first thing you need to do is understand the use case for each system. How can these systems contribute to your digital strategy? So understand the use case of the system. Will it be ongoing integration? Do you want to use this third-party system as part of just your initial phase? Do you want to just move data across, or do you want this to be part of an ongoing digital strategy where you have constant communication between your website and your marketing automation or your Salesforce or your SharePoint systems? This allows for distributed information management. Now, the original idea for web content management was distributed authoring. All of the information for most WCM systems are still managed by that CMS. However, the advantage of the CMS is that you can have multiple authors. The people who own this information are able to edit it themselves. That's the idea of the CMS. The idea of the DXH can be expanded beyond that so that you actually have the information being managed in these disparate systems. So that somebody who's managing physician profiles for a healthcare website may not want or need to put that same information into the CMS. That would be distributed information management. They manage it in their own system. You've got a seamless integration into your website. That information owner does not have to learn another system. They don't have to repeat that information in other systems that, like Ektron, that are part of the web strategy. Typically, these other systems are geared towards some kind of specialized purpose. So Marketo is a marketing and automation system. Salesforce is typically lead or CRM management. And SharePoint would be document management. So they each have a specialization, and they each have something to contribute into the overall strategy for your web presence. However, I would not recommend the Digital Experience Hub to do something like content migration. That's not to say that it's not capable of doing that, but the level of effort that it may take to go into writing a custom connector to move the data over just for one time is probably larger than you would want it to be. It's really intended for continuous integration. So if you were migrating your site from WordPress or some other system into Ektron, I would just go ahead and write the migration script to fit that specific need. To do a deep integration really requires bidirectional communication. And so you have Ektron talking to WordPress and WordPress talking to Ektron. If you wanted to do that to maintain a blog presence in a WordPress system and have it communicate back to Ektron as a continuous integration, then yes, I would use the DXH. But for a one-time push of data, the DXH is just simply not well suited to that purpose. So the Digital Experience Hub has been available since Ektron version 8.6, and we have continued to make improvements to that system over time. It is highly recommended that anybody who's interested in using the Digital Experience Hub be on the latest release of Ektron, because we have made revisions, we have made improvements over time. But that's going to be true of any software. Typically if you're on the latest stable release, then you have the most features and you have the most stability. And today we have a number of connectors. The most notable of those are SharePoint, Salesforce, HubSpot, and Marketo. We are working on connectors for other systems. These are the top 4. If you are interested in connectors for other systems, or what it may take to create a connector for another system, then I would strongly recommend that you contact your account manager to get more information. Okay, so why would the DXH be right for you? So the strong advantages are that your business workflows do not need to change. If you have a strong continuous integration between your web content management system and your internal information systems, then somebody doesn't have to learn Ektron. They don't have to learn new buttons to click, new data structures. They don't have to copy information. So your subject matter experts continue to work in systems in which they're already familiar and accustomed to working. So you're not asking somebody from HR to suddenly jump in and start managing a web content management system. They just continue to manage employee data, for example, in the system they already know, and this just provides a continuous integration with that. So you have less training and you have less support because those individuals continue to manage information in their own systems, and you simply provide the integration. The decentralization of information management means that the right type of information lives in the right type of system. So you are putting your HTML content into your WCM, you're putting your documents into SharePoint, you're putting your marketing into Marketo or HubSpot, and you're keeping the information with the appropriate system and allowing those systems to communicate. And the Digital Experience Hub is extensible to cover your legacy or custom systems. So if you have a custom data store of customer data or marketing data, then there's absolutely no reason you can't write your own connector to integrate those systems. Like I said, as long as they have an available API, or as long as you can create an API for those systems, then there's absolutely no reason to not provide that integration. Once those connectors are in place, this Digital Experience Hub is very simple to configure and very simple to use. It is designed to be used by marketing users. So it's very much point and click. It's very much natural language terminology. You don't have to have a very strong programming background. You don't even have to know HTML. As simple as we can possibly make it. This promotes a sensible architecture. So one rule of development is dry, which means don't repeat yourself. And that's going to be true no matter what you're doing, right? So you can create integrations manually between each of these systems, but you may end up, in so doing, repeating a lot of the same code in order to make Ektron speak with Salesforce directly, and Ektron speak with SharePoint directly, and Ektron speak with HubSpot directly. You're going to end up repeating a bit of code if you do that, whereas you can create a single Ektron connector that'll communicate back to the context bus and a single SharePoint connector. That allows those two systems to communicate without even being aware of each other via the context bus, which sits in the middle. And so you're only writing one connector to Ektron, you're only writing one connector to SharePoint, and any other systems that are connected to the DXH can communicate with each other through that central hub, the context bus. The transfer of information is automated and simple to understand, and we'll see more of that in a few minutes. And what it really promotes is you being able to use more of this data on your website rather than just in one or two locations. Integration with a system like Salesforce, for example, is you're going to link that Salesforce system to a certain form on your site or a certain widget, whatever, on your site. It's not going to be something that's easily repeatable site-wide, whereas the Digital Experience Hub can promote that repeated use of information and make it very simple. And overall, you will encounter less integration development and less maintenance because you aren't repeating a lot of code. And as far as integrating forms and submitting data back into those systems, it really is a seamless integration, and it's something that any person can do. And finally, you want to talk about targeting. So content targeting is a major feature that a lot of content management systems are trying to get into. And Ektron, I think, does it rather well. But the DXH really enhances the ability to do this kind of targeting because of those integrations with the other systems, which are done asynchronously. What you can do is suddenly all of that information, that wealth of information, can be employed to target content to your visitor. It allows your website to know your audience, to automatically say, here's what I know about this person, so therefore I want to show this content, without any developer intervention and with minimal author intervention. Then your content on your website adapts itself to fit the persona of the visitor who's on your site. And what that allows you to do is stop missing opportunities. So your opportunities on your site, whether it's you want to create leads, you want to create sales, whatever it is, the more you target content specifically to those visitors, the more opportunities you're going to get. That just makes sense. If I'm browsing a website as a developer persona, and I'm seeing adverts and promotions for financial services, I'm not very likely going to click on those. Whereas if you're showing me developer webinars or something of that nature, that's going to get my interest. You're going to get me to read more blogs. You're going to get me to download white papers. You're going to get me to buy stuff based on what you know about me already. And I want to give you a quick example of this. Several weeks ago, I received an email from Apple iTunes promoting this Justin Timberlake album. Now, I'm sure it's a great album, but I'm not sure why they sent it to me. After all, iTunes knows me, or Apple should know who I am and what I like. I buy all of my music through iTunes. And by the way, I have nothing against Justin Timberlake. I just don't have any of his music. I use iTunes Match. I've uploaded my entire library, whether it was purchased before iTunes or after, into Apple's space. They know all of my songs, and none of those are Justin Timberlake songs. And this is an actual search on my iTunes system. And you can see I have no Justin Timberlake songs on there. Again, I have nothing against him, just don't have any of his music. But they should know me better. Because they have this information, they have these other systems that should know what I'm interested in. They should have this store of customer data that about me available to target emails specifically to me. Now, I have bought Kings of Leon. I've bought songs from more than one album of theirs. Therefore, I might be more interested in Kings of Leon than I would be in Justin Timberlake. And in fact, they recently released an album, September 20th. I was not made aware of this at all. So this is a missed opportunity on Apple's part. They could have even just been telling me, hey, this is going to come out if it was before the date, or hey, this is just released if it was after. Because they know that I like Kings of Leon, or at least some of their songs that I've purchased, that I'm more likely to be interested in this, Justin Timberlake. See, you can do better. You have the opportunity here to know your visitors, to know what they've done, to track their purchases and target them specifically based on what you know about them. So when I go to Amazon, I get a completely different experience. I get images of headphones because I've looked at noise-canceling headphones within the last few months. I get images of the Kindle Fire because I am a Kindle owner and I have browsed a lot of digital devices. And I get some books that were recently released or pre-released from an author that I've read. This is an extremely tailored experience to me. And I'm much more likely to click on some of these promotions than the email that I got from Apple. So we're going to go into a little bit of a demo and tutorial next. And before we do, I want to go into the terminology. So we have the Digital Experience Hub, which, as we said earlier, facilitates communication between different applications and performs some operational functions, meaning that it does a translation. So it's able to take an Ektron submitted form data, map that to a lead in Salesforce, and generate that data object in Salesforce. And the DXH was written for Windows Communication Foundation. So these are WCF services that can run independently on their own separate servers if you want them to. Each connector is a service, and the context bus itself is a service. And all of these can exist separately and be scaled separately depending on your needs. And we have the context bus. This is the central WCF service which coordinates access across the entire system. So all of your connectors connect to the context bus. If you're making a request for data out of Salesforce, you don't actually connect directly to Salesforce. You tell the context bus, this is the system I want to access, this is the data I want to retrieve. The context bus will communicate with Salesforce and facilitate the transfer of that data for you. So this is, again, talking about just creating one integration between the system and the Digital Experience Hub and allowing that to facilitate communication with all of the other systems. And we have connectors. A connector is a single WCF-based service which represents a specific application to the Digital Experience Hub. So there is an Ektron connector, there is a Salesforce connector. These connectors represent those systems to the DXH. I finally talk about architecture just a little bit to give you an introduction to it. The DXH is a flexible, scalable architecture. The software for the Digital Experience Hub can be installed independently of the Ektron CMS. So you can have a separate dedicated server just for the Digital Experience Hub. It can have its own SQL connection, its own SQL database, and be completely separated. It can even be scaled and load balanced. Connectors can be installed and configured separately from the context bus. So you could actually have your Salesforce connector on one server, your Digital Experience Hub or context bus on another server, and Ektron on another server, and have all of this completely separated and completely scalable. And these are just simply WCF services. There's nothing more proprietary about them except that they know how to communicate back to the context bus. So just like any other service, it can be load balanced and it can be scaled. Now we're going to install and configure the Digital Experience Hub on a sandbox virtual machine that I've set up specifically for this demo. On the machine, I've configured SQL, IIS, installed Ektron, and have downloaded the DXH installer, which is on my desktop. Now note, as I said earlier, that the Digital Experience Hub does not have to be installed on the same server as Ektron. It can be installed independently, and even the connectors can be installed elsewhere, load balanced and scaled. For the purposes of the demo, however, it's easier to have everything on the same system. I want to show you that I have an Ektron min site installed. So I can show you the code, and I can show you the work area. It's currently the only site on the system, and the only database as well. Within the min site, I've created a very basic folder structure and added an HTML form. This is a very basic form with a handful of fields. And viewing the submitted data, you can see that I have no data currently in the form. Now, I'm going to run the DXH installer. Let's go to the desktop and run the executable. This is actually a very fast installation. So once this loads, I'll accept the license agreement. And it's allowing me to specify a port if I so choose. By default, it sets it to port 808. And since I'm just working on a local system, that's perfectly fine with me. I'm also working with a local SQL server, and the Digital Experience Hub will be installing and configuring its own database on that SQL server, but I'd like to note that it will not be making any changes to the Ektron site that I have installed. It's just merely setting up its own presence. So I'll click Next and Install. And this just takes a couple of seconds. And once the installation is complete, it's going to provide me with a URL. Now this URL is just using my machine name. Of course, it could be using, it could use a domain name, internal or external. I'm going to copy that and paste it into a text file, just so I don't lose it. Click Finish. So now that I've got the DXH installed, I'm going to hop back into the work area and actually start configuring it. So I'm going to go to Settings. I can collapse Configuration. And I'm going to go to Digital Experience Hub and click Connect to DXH. I'm going to paste in my DXH URL and test the connection. That's successful, so I'm going to save that by clicking Connect to DXH. Okay, and we'll give that a moment to refresh. Wonderful. Now I'm going to add two connections, one to Marketo, which is going to be the system that I'm targeting, and an inbound connection. I'll show you where that is. So inbound connection. The inbound connection is actually adding this Ektron website to the Digital Experience Hub. If you have multiple Ektron sites, they can all communicate to the DXH by repeating this process on each site. So I'm going to add my inbound connection first. I'll give it a connection name. And I need to enter certain required fields. Each connector that you're going to use with the Digital Experience Hub is going to require a different set of fields. And these are the fields that are required in order to access that system's APIs. So in Ektron, the required fields are you have to supply an administrator, username, and password. So I have admin there. I'm going to enter the password for admin. If I were using Active Directory, I would have to enter a domain as well, but I don't. And the site URL is just Ektron site. That's the site that I'm currently browsing. I'll test this connection, make sure that everything's successful, and then save. So once that's saved, I get a list of my connections that I've added so far. And I'll add a connection to Marketo as well. And you can see that Marketo is asking for a different set of data in order to connect to their APIs. Now I have this saved in a text file, so I'm just going to copy and paste them in and jump right back. Okay, so with my Marketo information entered, I can test this connection. It's successful, so I save. Alright, so now I have two connections through the Digital Experience Hub. I'm able to connect via my inbound connection, Ektron, to the DXH, and Ektron now knows that the DXH also has a Marketo connection. Okay, so once these connections are entered, I jump over to the HTML form that I have created. I'm going to see a new option when I go into this form. And that new option is Map to DXH. What this allows me to do is map the fields inside this form to an object in Marketo, Salesforce, or whatever system I'm integrating with. And this is all done through a very nice point-and-click UI. So I'm going to name this mapping. This is just an internal name. And this is going to show me which connections, which systems I'm able to connect to in order to submit data from this form. I only have one, that's a Marketo connection, but once I select this, it's actually going to come back and show me the types of objects that I'm allowed to create inside Marketo. Now, some systems have a large number of items, large number of objects that are available for creation, such as Salesforce. Marketo just has one, and that's a lead. So now the system has gone back to Marketo and said, okay, this user wants to create a lead. And Marketo is going to respond and say, these forms are required, or these fields are required in order to create a lead. Marketo requires that an email address be present in order to generate a lead inside their system. So I want to map the required email address field coming from Marketo to the form field email in the form that I created. Now I have my required field mapped. I can add optional fields. So first I'm going to say that this form field company will map to the Marketo lead field company name. That's not actually a duplicate. I'm going to map first name to first name and last name to last name. And publish. And this is actually saving this mapping right now. So what I can do after that's saved is test the form mapping just to make sure everything's working the way that I want. And this presents me with a form. Now, this is not the same form that I've edited in Ektron, that I've created in Ektron. What this is just simply raw data fields that are going to get passed through the Digital Experience Hub to my Marketo system. This does not register as a submission on the form itself. It's simply a raw passive data. So I'm going to enter James Stout, James at Ektron.com, and company is Ektron, and test the mapping. And Marketo will return and say that was successful. So now I can jump over to Marketo system, and I have a custom list here that's going to show any leads that are generated today. So I'm going to click on that tab at the top to refresh the list. And I can see, in fact, I do have a lead created today using the data that I just entered in that test mapping. So I'm going to select that and delete the lead just to remove any residual data. So we're going to be testing this again. That's queued for deletion. It'll just take a few seconds for Marketo to delete. But while we're doing that, I can jump over to Internet Explorer, where I have this form loaded as a site visitor. Now, I'm not logged into Ektron via Internet Explorer, and I can show you inside Visual Studio that this is just a very basic form page. It just has a form control with a dynamic property. And if I view the code on that, there's absolutely nothing going on in the code behind. Okay, so I'm going to fill out this form again. And for email, I'm going to enter James2 at Ektron.com and company name Ektron Inc. And submit the form. Now when I submit the form, this is actually making an asynchronous request to the context bus service. That asynchronous way of going about this means that it's not going to impact the site visitor performance-wise. The site is not waiting for Marketo to respond in order to present the visitor with the postback message. Now, all other properties of the form in Ektron, whether that is configured to store it in the database, as this is, or configured to send an email, function as normal as well. So with that form submitted, I can jump back over to Marketo, refresh my leads table. I can see the previous lead was deleted. And I see a new lead, ID is incremented, and the data that I entered, Ektron Inc. instead of Ektron, and James2 at Ektron.com instead of James at Ektron.com. Great, so that's exactly what I want. This form is now generating leads for me on my website. Every time a user submits this form, I get data in Marketo, which is wonderful. That's exactly what I want. And you can see how simple this was. I didn't have to write any code. I did no custom integration whatsoever. I did nothing out of the ordinary except install the Digital Experience Hub and set up the connectors and map the form field. And all of that was done through a point-and-click UI. Nothing else had to be done. So this is definitely targeting business users in its ease of use. And with this form submitting correctly, I can even go back into Ektron, close this test, view a report on the form, and I can see that the only data that was recorded was the data I submitted through Internet Explorer. You can see that the test data has not been recorded as part of the form. But this really just gives us one side of an integration. This allows us to take Ektron data submitted through a form and pass it to Marketo so that Marketo can then take action on that data, whether it's somebody who uses Marketo taking action or Marketo itself doing some processing with that data, adding them to a mailing list or something of the sort. What we want to do next is the inverse of that, where Ektron is requesting the data out of Marketo and tailoring the site experience based on what we already know about that visitor. Now, to do this, we're going to use persona management. Now, it can be done without personas, but personas really demonstrate the power of this in a much different way. So we will be using targeted content eventually, but persona management is the nuts and bolts of how that should be done. So I'm going to install persona management. This is similar to installing the DXH itself. It goes through a very brief setup process, accept the license terms. It's going to actually create its own persona management site. So it's just going to install some files into my inet pub. That's fine. We'll click next. This is now asking for the URL for my context bus. Because it's local, it's able to detect it. But if I wanted to install that on another server, I could just enter the other URL here, whatever domain or IP that requires. So that's my connection to the DXH. I'll click next. And it's going to set up its own database instance inside SQL. I'll click next. And install. At the end of this, it's going to ask me if I want to launch persona management, and I do. So it's going to open up persona management in Chrome. It's just machine name 809 in the URL. Now I can add another persona by clicking the plus, or just simply by clicking in this dotted outline box. So I'll click inside there. I'm going to create a new anonymous persona. I'm going to give this a name, James the Ektronite. And the description is visitor from the awesome, glorious company known as Ektron with an exclamation. This is all just internal description and internal information so that you can define your persona and what that persona looks like. So attributes. Now when I click attributes, it's actually going to communicate with the Digital Experience Hub, look for any available connections, and because I'm connected to Marketo, it's going to pull back all of the various attributes that I may have about this user, about this person in Marketo. What I can do is I can filter this and say I only want to look for attributes that contain the word company, company name specifically. I'm going to click on company name. I'm going to say James the Ektron Knight is somebody whose company name is Ektron. Well, except that when I demonstrated submitting the form data, there were a couple of different ways I could say Ektron. I could say Ektron, or I could say Ektron Inc. So it's not very precise. I could say that it contains Ektron, but again, there's a possibility that some company names may have some ambiguity. So instead of using company name, I'm going to get rid of that attribute. I'm going to use email. So I'm going to say email address. So if the visitor's email address, I'm going to say ends with Ektron.com, that's a more realistic way of knowing that somebody is from Ektron.com. For a couple of reasons. It's not likely somebody's going to misspell, but they may. But more because email address is a required field. I could have leads inside Marketo that don't have a company name, but I know from creating the form that email address is a required field for a lead. So I click save that, and I can just click away, and that's going to save my attribute, and I can save the persona by clicking the disk icon. Okay, so now I have a persona, James the Ektronite. There's something else I need to do before I can start using this in Ektron, and I need to actually modify my web.config. Persona management endpoint. There we go. So I'm going to uncomment this, and my persona management endpoint URL I actually have open here. I'll copy that out. Paste it there. And save. Now if I didn't have this conveniently open already to copy that URL, I can get to persona management on this machine a couple of different ways. So first is if I were using a Windows, say 2008 server, I could click on Start and go to Programs, Ektron, Persona Management, and get it there, but I'm on a 2012 machine, so what I'm going to do is hit my Windows key on my keyboard, which brings me to my Start screen, and I'm just going to type Persona, and it gives me the Persona Management link, which takes me just to the same page. So we'll close that. Alright, so that's set up the endpoint URL, but I also need to uncomment another line. So I'm going to go back to my search, say persona management matches module. Needs to be uncommented, so I'm going to take that out. Save that as well. Now with that set up, my web.config saved, I'm going to go back to the work area. Now inside the work area, I've created two additional pieces of content. And these pieces of content I want to target to certain visitors, depending on whether they're coming from Ektron, whether they match that persona or not. So the visitors who don't match that persona, I want to show a piece of content called Everyone. And the visitors who do match that persona, I want to show a piece of content called Ektron. Now the way that we're going to do this is through Page Builder and using the Targeted Content widget. So if I click into Pages, I have a single Page Builder template configured. So we'll create a new page layout. So I'm going to leave that selected, click Next, give this title, Target Me, change the end of the alias to a slash, click Next. I'm not worried about the metadata, so I'll just finish this and click OK to start editing my page. Now once I'm in editing my Page Builder page, I'll click on Widgets, and I've just enabled two widgets for this page, the Targeted Content and Content Block. Well, first I'm going to add a Targeted Content widget, so I'll click on the widget in place. Alright, so with the widget on the page, the first thing I'm going to do is edit the condition. That's just editing the default condition. It does start with 1. I'll give this a name. I'm going to call it default. I'm just going to set this to be otherwise. Alright, so what happens is this is the content that will be displayed if no other conditions are met. Let's save this. And inside my first condition, which I've named default, I'm going to add a content block. Get rid of that. I'm going to edit the content block. And for my default condition, I'm going to choose my everyone content. Save. All right, so now I have my everyone condition, my everyone content. I'm going to add a new condition that will match my persona. Call this Ektron persona. You could have it match James the Ektronite, whatever you like. I'm going to say, or persona title is James the Ektronite. So if I'm able to identify through Marketo that this visitor matches this persona, and this is done by them submitting a form saying that their email address ends in ektron.com, identifies that user as James the Ektronite persona. Let's save this. And I'm going to change the ordering of these conditions because I want the more specific conditions to be listed at the top and the very generic conditions, including the default, to be listed at the bottom, preferably with the default at the very end. Now the reason for this is default is always going to be true. So this is akin to saying if true, then show this content. It's never going to reach the Ektron persona. So I want to say if you're the Ektron persona, do whatever widget I add here. Otherwise, do the default, and the sequence is important. So I'm going to change Ektron persona to the number 1 position. Okay, now inside my Ektron persona condition, I want to add another content block. I'm going to edit this one. And for this, I'm going to choose my Ektron content. Great. So now the way this should work is when a visitor comes to the site, if I recognize them as being from Ektron, it'll show my Ektron content. If I don't recognize them, it'll show my everyone content. So I take page action and publish this page. And what I see when the page is published is my everyone content. I want to show everyone this content. Great. With my page ready, I want to go back over to Internet Explorer. And what I'm going to do is hit F12 to get my developer tools here. And I want to just delete all of my session cookies and all cookies for the domain to be safe, just to make sure that there's nothing residual here that's going to come up and interfere with what I have going on. Go back to my registration form. And I'm also going to go to Ektron site /target me, which is the page builder page that I just created. When I go to Ektron site /target me, it should not recognize me and display the everyone content. So I want to show everyone this content. Great, that's exactly what we want to see. If I go to Marketo, I am going to delete this lead so we're starting fresh. Now that's queued to process. Should just take it a couple of seconds to actually remove the lead from Marketo. Great, so now I have no leads in Marketo. I have no cookies in Ektron except what just got created. If I go to the form test, I have no pre-filled form values. If I go to the page builder page, I get the everyone content. So this is perfect for my test. So I'm going to enter values into the form and say James Stout, James at Ektron.com, and company is Ektron. Now what the persona should be matching is the end of my email address. If it ends with Ektron.com, it should come up with a match and show me the Ektron content when I come back to this page. So I'm going to submit my form data. Now because this is an asynchronous operation, it may actually take a few seconds for the lead to generate inside Marketo. All right, so I have a lead inside Marketo. If I go back over to Internet Explorer, to my page builder page, and start refreshing that page, I should see the Ektron content come up because I'm matching that persona. And there we go. I get recognized through that persona as somebody from Ektron because I entered an email address that ends with ektron.com, and I get the content that I only want shown to people from Ektron. This is based on me just entering the form value. The data goes to Marketo. Ektron then reads the data from Marketo and matches me against that persona list. So as I continue to browse the site, more and more of the website can actually target me based on that form data and based on what else is known about me in Marketo. So in practice, this could actually be a long-term relationship with the site visitor. I still have this cookie in my browser. When I come back to the page, it's still going to recognize me as that persona. I can close out of Internet Explorer and come back in and go back to the Target Me page. I still see that Ektron content, so I'm still being recognized even after I close the browser, end my session, and come back. Now, in the in-between, after I close the browser, but before I come back, somebody could take more action on that data inside Marketo. They could be populating that data with more information, the kinds of things that I might be interested in. They may add my job title if they've had a communication with me, if they've sent me an email and I've responded to that email or opened the link inside it. Then Marketo can track that information, and I can be targeted to based on that data. And the content that you're targeting to me could be advertisements, downloads, white papers, webinars, anything that you want, any content within the system. So it could target me based on my job title. And to use an example, if I have filled out a form on your site and I've told you that I'm a developer, or I have the word developer in my job title, then you're not going to target me with webinars about finance. You're going to target me with webinars about development. So you don't want to try to create a one-size-fits-all experience. You want to create a very tailored experience for your visitors. And this is an extremely sophisticated mechanism through which you can do that. And as we've seen, it's very point and click. Once it's set up, there's very little maintenance that has to be done, and this integration can be site-wide. So as we said in the presentation, the integrations that you often see on websites are specific to pieces of the website. It's not really generic enough to be implemented site-wide. And this is definitely a site-wide implementation where multiple pieces of any given page are being targeted to a specific persona. All of the data for this targeting lives outside of Ektron. So nobody has to add it, nobody has to manage it or duplicate it inside Ektron. It continues to live in Marketo. It continues to reside under the ownership of whoever manages that Marketo data. And if I wanted, I could go update that data in Marketo and further impact the visitor experience on this site just through that manipulation of data. The site itself is automating this targeting for me. All I have to do is tell it what I want to automate, and all of the rest of it falls into place. So that's, in essence, the Digital Experience Hub. Thank you for watching. I hope that you are now thinking about how you might use the Digital Experience Hub and persona management to enhance the visitor experience of your site. How can you use what you know about your visitors to make the site experience something that's tailored to them and something that promotes their interest in your site and in your product? If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me on Twitter at egandalf, or send me an email to james.stout@ektron.com. Again, thank you for watching, and have a great day.